If everyone will please take their seat.
Okay, the next item that we have is financial oversight and amending city purchasing and contracting ordinance. Who brought that?
I think we all did.
Ms. Myers echoed what I had written out, and I'll sort of frame what the memo is that's included a little bit in my comments. That, in theory, we'll soon have a budget for the city, and it really includes a lot of things and reflects a lot of government priorities. But I think we need to ask ourselves if it's worth the paper it's printed on. Last year we got some hints of how the administration views our ordinances and policies, and basically the summary of that is they believe that those ordinances and policies give the latitude for the mayor to move dollars as he wishes within a fund. So if we decide to fund somebody in MIS, which we're hearing was lacking in performance, that money could then turn around and be used for advertising. That kind of flexibility they assumed was part of our ordinances and policies, but that's really not what I read the charter as intending when, the pro-charter group promised voters that all projects must be in the budget and approved by council. This charter, people usually talk about the framers of the Constitution. It's a framework, and we need to start furnishing our house. And I'm asking for the council to consider approving an ordinance in the future to incorporate budgetary controls. The memo that's attached in the agenda, these were things I threw out as topics of discussion. No money shall be moved between programs without council approval. So, and our budget clearly delineates programs. No money shall be moved from personal services to operating expenses or vice versa. Any transfer exceeding $25,000 to or from an expenditure category, those are what we sometimes call line items. This is my new lesson, that when it says, 9532, that I understand the language is expenditure category. And then just to note that, or to whatever policy or ordinance, that the expenditure categories for professional services and other contractual services aren't specifically appropriated, and expenditures over $25,000 contracts and for those expenditures should come to the council for approval unless they're specified in the budget process. I think those changes provide the mayor with latitude to meet changing needs as the city evolves. We meet monthly, so if there's ever, at least monthly according to the charter, if there's ever a change that needs funding, we're available to approve it. But it ensures that the government the government formed by this charter provides the transparency and oversight that was promised. I look forward to the discussion, and I hope that we'll end this discussion by directing the attorney to draft an ordinance incorporating the suggestions that we would like to see in terms of financial controls. Thank you.
Councilwoman DeWeese.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and I want to thank Dr. Pratt for bringing these forward. I don't know if the members of council that were with me when this came up, Mr. Kobe brought forward the change of the $25,000 and allowing it to be $100,000 for SBEs. And I was very concerned about that. We had just had the discussion on the new charter. We didn't know who would be mayor, but I was concerned about that limitation. And then obviously the stuff that came back for Believe in Pensacola, and that I actually stood strongly for. This was promised that council would have a say in the contracting issue. So I'm glad you included that in some of these, and we have seen some of these interdepartmental moves. My biggest example, and I still haven't reconciled it, is the unfilled funded positions for people being reallocated and moved around for the Zimmerman contract. That, to me, just was, obviously it worked from the accounting standpoint, but logically or process-oriented, that's not what we ensured the citizens as oversight. That was a completely different use of funds from what was contemplated and approved in our budget. So I applaud you for this. I don't know if you're making a motion today for these items to be put in an ordinance form or what, but I completely support you on that.
Could we possibly ask the attorney to review what has been submitted and bring us back something, and then we could go forth with that rather than putting it in form of a motion. Would you prefer to do that?
And I had hoped when we had asked for this to be put on the agenda, I think I specifically asked to make sure that the attorney looked at it to make sure that these changes might be acceptable legally.
Yes.
I think what I've come to understand is the administration, the attorney, don't want to be running around writing ordinances or doing things unless we have some sort of consent among us that we sort of like the general direction. I'm sure that my language is not ordinance language, and there'll be tweaks and special finance words added, but I think it probably makes more sense for us to have a specific motion, though as a discussion item, these were things that I saw, but I want to hear if other council members have changes they would like to see, and we could then sort of send that general conversation to the attorney.
Councilwoman Margaret.
Yes, I do have something I would like to see changed. In addition, I support the amendment suggested by Dr. Pratt, but I have a real problem with certain positions being contracted positions. This issue came up regarding a staff person who, the chief of staff, who has a contract, and someone wanted to look at his business contacts. And one of the things that came out in that discussion is that this position, because this is a contracted position, this person is a vendor and does not appear to be subject to the same standards of transparency, if you will, that an employee would be. In other words, is not subject to our ethics ordinance. For an example, there are certain high-level positions which I do not believe should be contracted positions for that reason. I would like to see an amendment in our ordinance that prohibits the contracting of the chief of staff, the city administrator, the city attorney, department heads, and the heads of offices. High-level positions, I think, require a greater degree of transparency, fiduciary, and accountability. And those positions should not be contracted positions. I would like to see that somehow worded in an ordinance. In other words, the chief of staff would be an employee of the city and could not be under contract as a private contractor. So that would basically, I think, address some of the concerns some council members have regarding these contracted positions. So that's something I would like to see in way of amendment to this purchasing ordinance.
Okay, we're talking about two separate things here. Mr. Mercer, did you have your pencil down and jotted down all of the things that she would like to see?
Thank you, sir. I can get it from the clerk.
Okay. What we're going to do, he's going to do the research specifically as to how what you're suggesting equates to the charter.
Well,
If it does, may I finish?
okay.
And in fact, if it doesn't, then he'll bring back a report to that effect if that's the desire of this council.
I'm not sure that it relates, to the charter, except that I think the council
Well,
can...
the charter talks about positions and the mayor appoint, hiring people, firing people, et cetera. So, in fact, what you're suggesting is that it does have a bearing on the charter.
It has a bearing on whether or not something can be contracted.
Well, we need to understand that. Understand that. If it doesn't, he'll look at that. He knows specifically what your concerns are. Yes. Could we do it that way?
Sure.
Yes, Councilman Gerald.
I had my hand up, yes. Thank you for...
You ready? I'm sorry.
I did. I just put it back down.
You put it back up. Or back down.
I'm concerned that it is two separate issues and that we ask for them to be addressed separately, but that we do give Mr. Messer and Mr. Reynolds a motion from this body that we would like those addressed and have a second and move forward. Otherwise, we're just talking about what we'd like to do, and
Okay.
we are the legislative branch. So-
I'll accept the motion to that effect if we could do that.
And I'll defer to
yes,
Dr.
Councilman
Pratt.
Gerald.
Well, to me, the point is the same. And I would say for the past 8 or 9 months, I have been suggesting that, and I want to thank Dr. Pratt for bringing this up. And in my opinion, it's a result of reading the charter and looking at what we're doing and coming up with what we could or should be doing. For the past 6 or 8 months, I've been encouraging us to sit down, take a look at the charter, see what things we need to change or modify as a group versus doing it piecemeal. And Ms. Myers has another issue that she wants to talk about. Dr. Pratt has brought one, but I can tell you that until we sit down and look at that charter in its entirety, and then we can modify those things that are inconsistent, because after all, a group of citizens put that thing together. We looked at it, we approved it, the citizens voted on it. But I have a feeling, it's not just a feeling, that there are some little things in there that may not have been clear. And a review of the charter, if it takes us an entire day just to do the charter, would enlighten this group tremendously. And we would not have to go through these items piecemeal. We need to take a real bird's eye view of that charter so we can figure out and get a better understanding of what's supposed to be happening. And it's like any other class or book. Failure to read the book. And I have to always refer to my experience as an educator. And I could always tell when the class had not done their homework. And that's a fact. And until we do that, and this is good, we want to look at it, and if a new ordinance is needed, and if some adjustments are needed on the concerns of Ms. Myers, but I would suggest we take a real close look. And we may be surprised as to what we find that we can modify so that this group and the mayor's office can begin to work together once we all understand the boundaries. And as I listen to the discussions, it's really not clear in the minds of some of us. So if we can decide that we want to sit down and examine that document, and then I believe we would have a better understanding of our directions, our authorities, our responsibilities, and our ability to work together. Thank you.
I'm going to give you a motion so we can
Please.
move on. But first, I want to comment that, Mr. Geralds, I look forward to that conversation, but I think waiting to have that conversation, I think it's more important now to start taking some of the action that we have seen needed. So I move that we ask the city attorney to draft an ordinance incorporating those 4 areas: the movement between programs, personal service and operating, to or from an expenditure category, or professional service and other contractual services, as I outlined in the memo, to bring us an ordinance reflecting those recommendations at the next council meeting.
Second.
Please.
Yes, I certainly have no objection to drafting the ordinance, but I'd just appreciate another 2
can have
weeks.
it-
I want to coordinate with Mr. Barker. I mean,
Yeah.
this, sort of you want it bad, you get it bad. I like to give a little more thought than the next council meeting.
Okay. Okay.
But I don't have to take the rest of the year.
Just keep hurrying. I'll amend.
Properly moved in second. Any questions? Question from, yes?
Yeah, are we going to incorporate,
Separate.
Ms. Myers had some
Separate.
concerns, and we're not going to,
Separate.
do that a separate motion then?
Yeah, right. Let's do a separate thing on that.
Okay, and I would encourage her to use the word administrator and any other synonyms to director. Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Now, Ms. Myers, I'm sorry, Councilman Wu? Or you opposed? Okay. One opposed. Councilwoman Myers?
Okay, I'm going to make a motion that the certain positions not be subject to contract, including the chief of staff, administrative positions, department heads, and heads of offices. And that the city attorney give us an opinion as to whether or not that would be in violation of the charter.
Second.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I'd certainly be glad to do that, Councilwoman Maris, but, you know, everyone's concerned about disclosure lately, and that's a good thing. So for those of you who don't know, I am a contract employee. So what I'm going to do, with your permission, is just contract that out to another law firm.
At what
Because
will be fine.
I don't think you want me writing an opinion on whether or not I should lose my job today.
Okay. So you're asking for an amended motion? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, the motion is that the city attorney do a research to determine whether those positions that were mentioned can be contracted out. Is that,
That's correct.
Well,
Okay.
no.
is that what you said? What did you say? Or
What
should
did you
not be
say?
contracted out?
Right.
Well-
The motion is that certain positions are not subject to contract, including the administrative positions, including the chief of staff, the city attorney, the city administrator, department heads, and heads of offices, subject to the city attorney or his designee giving us an opinion as to whether this would be in violation of the charter.
Thank you. Second?
So she seconded.
I seconded it.
Okay, you have a question on?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment a few things. My understanding was that the request was to see if the council can make it illegal to, or whatever, make an ordinance
that's
to
correct.
prevent that, not if doing them as contract is legal under the charter, but
That's-
whether we have the power to do that.
That's right, that's what the motion.
I want to raise a couple of things. We used to, in the old form, many of the employees were contract employees, department heads were contract, and a lot of that has changed with, and I don't know, whether the abolition of civil service changes what a contract employee means, but historically we have had contract employees for many of those positions. Just the definition of contract was different. They weren't outside people, but they just had a direct contract with the city for their employment. So I hope that there's a fluid understanding of what your request is, because I think many employees in the world are contract employees, even if they're here. It's just, it's complicated. The other part that you brought up in your initial comments was really a question of how does our ethics ordinance apply to said contract employees. And I think that might be actually a more appropriate way for us to address that, is how our definition of our ethics code. I mean, the new charter, one of the big promises was a very strong ethics code, and maybe we need to consider amending that to include contract employees or X, Y, or Z. And so I hope that this is understood as generally what are our options regarding contract employees and ensuring that they meet the standards that we expect.
I would suspect that the ethics part would very well should be encompassed into the research, because in fact, if there are some issues regarding ethics, we would expect, whether they're contract or whatever the case may be, to be covered by those standards. So I would hope that that would be part of the thing. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and Councilwoman Pratt actually brings up a very good point, because I have a contract with the city of Pensacola. I think the difference is there is a vendor as opposed to a contract employee. My sole responsibilities are for the city. And your department heads are also contract employees, but they're not vendors. Their responsibilities are solely for the city as well. And you know, we may need some clarification in that line as well.
Okay. Yes.
I seconded it.
Okay, well, we can drag this on for months. I think we basically know what we want to do here. And when they bring it back, if it does not encompass everything, then we can speak to it. But we can go around in a circle all night on this thing.
I just want to be clear, as having seconded the motion, that we are asking the city attorney that he understands the will of this council is to address the issue of the ethics, the code of ethics being applicable to all that are in service to the city, whether it is a vendor or a contracted department head or anyone that has a contract, but they're also employees. So there's a few layers of issues that we need to address here, but I just want to make sure that it's clear the issue that we're trying to solve.
Yes, sir, I think it's clear.
He says thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I just wanted to make one last comment. Mr. Reynolds brings up a good point. What I'm actually concerned about are people who have a vendor status. So that is what my main concern are those types of contracts with vendors. There are ways to draft contracts with vendors so that we can make them subject to a lot of things if they want to be a vendor. So,
And thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Just for the record, I was involved in drafting Mr. Asmar's contract, and there's a specific paragraph in there that subjects him to the city's code of ethics. Now, I didn't negotiate my contract. I had another attorney. I'm guessing there's the same provisions in there, but I couldn't tell you.
okay, thank you.
Any comments from the audience? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? Opposed, 2. Okay, that concludes council discussion.